Okay, so here's the thing about thinking you know everything at 25. You don't know jack. I'm Chloe, and I basically ruined my entire life because I got bored and thought I was smarter than everyone else. But honestly, I still don't think what I did was that wrong. I mean, it was my idea and Harrison agreed to it, so whatever happened after that was on both of us, right? So 2 years ago, I'm living with this guy Harrison, who's 27 and has his whole life figured out or whatever. We met through mutual friends, and he was cute enough, had a decent job, doing something with computers or accounting. I don't really remember the details. Point is, he made good money, and I was working part-time at this clothing store downtown, barely covering my car payment. Moving in together just made sense financially. Plus, he was always buying groceries and paying for dates without making it weird. The thing is, Harrison was just so predictable. Every single day, he'd come home at exactly 5:30, ask how my day went, like he actually cared about my boring retail stories, and want to cook dinner together. Don't get me wrong, it was sweet at first. He'd remember little things I mentioned, surprise me with my favorite coffee, actually listen when I talked. But after a year of the same routine, I started feeling like I was suffocating. I'd watch him folding laundry on Sunday mornings or organizing his desk drawer for the third time that week, and I'd think, is this really it? Is this what the rest of my life looks like? He was content with our little bubble, but I felt like I was missing out on everything. Like, we'd go to the same 3 restaurants, watch the same Netflix shows, have the same conversations about his work friends who I barely cared about. My coworker Brittany started telling me about how she and her boyfriend tried an open relationship and how amazing it was for their connection. She said it made them appreciate each other more, made their intimacy better, helped them grow as individuals. I became obsessed with the idea. I started researching online, reading articles about how monogamy was this outdated concept that society forced on people. The more I read, the more convinced I became that Harrison and I needed this. We were both young, we should be exploring and experiencing different people. I mean, what if we got married and I never knew what else was out there? What if there was someone who could excite me in ways Harrison couldn't? I wasn't planning to leave him or anything. I just wanted to see what I was missing. I started dropping hints, bringing up articles I'd read about how evolved couples handle relationships. I'd mention how boring traditional relationships seemed compared to people who were secure enough to let their partners explore. Harrison would just nod along, not really engaging, which honestly irritated me. Like, I'm trying to have a deep conversation about our future, and he's acting like I'm talking about the weather. When I'd bring up how some of our friends seemed so much more adventurous than us, he'd just shrug and say he was happy with what we had. But I wasn't happy. I was dying inside from the routine and the predictability. I needed something more, something that would make me feel alive again. And if Harrison really loved me, wouldn't he want me to be fulfilled and happy? I started testing the waters more directly, asking hypothetical questions about what he'd do if I wanted to see other people. He'd get this uncomfortable look and change the subject, which just proved to me that he was being possessive and insecure. I mean, if you really trust someone, why would you be threatened by them exploring other connections? It's not like I was talking about falling in love with someone else, just having new experiences that would ultimately make our relationship stronger. The whole thing started feeling like Harrison was holding me back from becoming my best self. Here I was, trying to evolve and grow, and he was stuck in this traditional mindset that love meant owning someone. I started feeling resentful that he couldn't see how much more sophisticated and mature my approach was. Like, maybe the reason our relationship felt stale was because we weren't challenging ourselves or each other anymore. I decided I needed to be more direct about what I needed from him if we were going to make this work long term. The campaign to convince Harrison took about 3 weeks of serious effort on my part. I'd leave articles about open relationships on his desk, bookmark stories about couples who'd strengthened their bond through exploration. When he'd come home from work, I'd casually mention how this celebrity couple or that podcast host talked about the benefits of ethical non-monogamy. Harrison would read whatever I showed him, but never seemed enthusiastic. He'd ask questions like, "But doesn't this usually end badly?" Or, "What if one person gets more attached than the other?" Which honestly just showed how negative and close-minded he was being. I'd explain that those problems only happened when people weren't mature enough to handle it properly, when they let jealousy and insecurity take over instead of communicating openly. I started pointing out how routine our relationship had become. Like, we hadn't had a really passionate night together in months. We barely even flirted anymore. We were more like roommates than lovers. I'd tell him that maybe if we both had other experiences to draw from, we'd appreciate each other more and bring that energy back to our relationship. He'd just look sad when I said stuff like that, which frustrated me even more. The turning point came when I told him about Brittany and her boyfriend. I explained how they'd been together 4 years, and their relationship was stronger than ever because they weren't taking each other for granted. They both dated other people, but always came home to each other, and the stories Brittany told me about their reconnection afterward sounded incredible. Harrison asked if I already had someone in mind, and I got defensive. I told him this wasn't about any specific person, it was about us growing together instead of getting stagnant. But honestly, there was this guy Marcus from the coffee shop next to my work who'd been flirting with me for weeks, and this other guy from my gym who kept asking if I wanted to grab drinks sometime. I wasn't doing anything inappropriate, but I was definitely aware of the attention. When Harrison would bring up his concerns, I'd flip it back on him. Like, why was he so threatened by the idea of me connecting with other people? Did he think I was going to leave him the second someone else showed interest? That said more about his insecurities than it did about my intentions. I loved him. That's why I wanted us to try this together instead of me just cheating or breaking up with him. I started withholding affection when he'd shut down these conversations. Not on purpose exactly, but I'd feel disconnected from him when he couldn't engage with something so important to me. Then when he'd seem more open to discussing it, I'd be extra loving and attentive. I wanted him to see the difference, how much better things could be between us when we were both being honest about our needs. The breakthrough came when I told him I felt trapped. Not by him specifically, but by the whole concept of traditional relationships. I explained that I was 25 and had only seriously dated 3 people in my entire life. How was I supposed to know if what we had was really special if I had nothing to compare it to? I wasn't asking to leave him. I was asking for us to explore together so we could choose each other every day instead of just staying together out of habit. Harrison finally said he'd think about it, which felt like progress. But then he came back with this condition that honestly seemed a little dramatic. He said if he developed real feelings for someone else during this experiment, he'd have to end our relationship rather than string me along. I thought that was kind of extreme. Like, the whole point was that what we had was special and wouldn't be threatened by casual connections with other people. But I agreed, because I knew it wouldn't be an issue. Harrison had been with me for 2 years. He wasn't going to throw that away for some random hookup. Plus, I was the one pushing for this, so obviously I was the one who was going to benefit more from the experience. I was ready to explore, while he'd probably be too nervous or picky to even find anyone worth dating. When he finally said yes, I felt this huge rush of relief and excitement. Finally, we were going to break out of our rut and experience what we'd been missing. I immediately started making plans, updating my dating profiles that I'd secretly created weeks earlier, reaching out to Marcus and that guy from the gym. Harrison seemed quiet and sad about the whole thing, but I figured he just needed time to adjust to our new normal. Within a week, I had 3 different dates lined up. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in months. The anticipation, the getting ready, the flirting. It was like I was myself again, instead of just Harrison's boring girlfriend. He asked if I wanted to set any ground rules, but I thought that would just complicate things. We trusted each other, and that should be enough. I didn't really pay attention to what Harrison was doing during those first few weeks. I was too caught up in my own experiences, finally feeling desired and interesting again. It was exactly what I thought our relationship needed. some excitement and validation from outside sources to remind us why we chose each other. 3 months into our open relationship, things weren't going exactly like I'd planned. The guys I was dating were fun for a few weeks, but none of them offered anything substantial. Marcus turned out to be kind of shallow. All he wanted to talk about was his gym routine and his protein shakes. The other guy was decent, but clearly just looking for something casual without any emotional connection. I started feeling frustrated because I wanted the excitement of new relationships, but also the depth and security I had with Harrison. These other guys didn't know my favorite coffee order or remember stories I'd told them weeks earlier. They didn't care if I had a bad day at work or notice when I got my hair done. The validation was nice, but it felt empty compared to what I was used to. Meanwhile, Harrison seemed different. He was happier somehow, more confident when he talked to people. He'd started going out more, joining some hiking group and taking photography classes on weekends. When I'd ask about his dating life, he'd just say it was going well and change the subject. Part of me was annoyed that he wasn't sharing details like I was, but I was too busy with my own drama to push it. The thing that really started bothering me was how unavailable he'd become. He used to always be free when I wanted to do something together, but now he had plans I didn't know about. He'd get texts during dinner and smile at his phone in a way that made my stomach twist. When I'd ask who he was talking to, he'd just say a friend and put his phone away. I started feeling jealous, which was stupid, because this whole thing was my idea. But I'd assumed Harrison would struggle more with dating other people. He'd always been kind of shy and awkward with women when we first met. I thought he'd go on a few boring dates and realize how good he had it with me. Instead, he seemed to be thriving in ways that made me uncomfortable. My own dating life was becoming more desperate. I was going out with guys I wasn't even attracted to, just to have something to do, trying to find someone who could give me the butterfly feelings I was craving. But everyone felt like a downgrade from Harrison, which wasn't the point of this experiment at all. I started picking fights with Harrison about stupid things. Why he was always on his phone, why he seemed distracted when we spent time together, why he wasn't putting effort into our relationship anymore. He'd just look at me like I was being ridiculous and remind me that I was the one who wanted us to explore other connections. But I wasn't neglecting our relationship the way he was. When I'd try to plan date nights or weekend trips together, he'd often have other commitments. I felt like I was competing for time with my own boyfriend, which wasn't how this was supposed to work. The other people we dated were supposed to be extras, not main characters in our lives. I started questioning whether Harrison was following our unspoken rules. Like, was he getting too emotionally involved with whoever he was seeing? Was he sharing intimate details about our relationship with some random girl? The whole point was to keep these other connections light and fun, not to replace what we had together. But he seemed to be taking it way more seriously than I'd expected. The worst part was how he'd stopped engaging with my drama the way he used to. When I'd complain about my dates or want to analyze what some guy meant by a certain text, Harrison would just nod and make non-committal sounds instead of really listening. He used to care about every detail of my day, but now he seemed distracted and uninterested in my problems. I began to suspect he was seeing someone specific rather than just casual dating like I was. There were too many consistent patterns, leaving at the same times, being unavailable on certain days, getting similar types of messages. When I'd hint around about it, trying to get details, he'd just say he was respecting his dating partner's privacy the same way he respected mine. But I wasn't being secretive. I told him about everyone I went out with, shared funny stories and frustrating moments. I thought we were supposed to be open about this experience, not protective and sneaky. His attitude was starting to make me feel like maybe he was getting more out of this arrangement than I was, which definitely wasn't the plan. The discovery that changed everything happened on a random Tuesday when I was scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break. I saw Harrison tagged in a photo at some restaurant downtown, smiling bigger than I'd seen him smile in months. But he wasn't alone. There was this woman next to him who looked happy and comfortable, not like someone on a casual date. Her name was Jessica, and she worked in his building, apparently. I went down a rabbit hole looking through her profile, and there were multiple photos of them together going back weeks. At art galleries, hiking trails, even what looked like a weekend trip to some cabin. They looked like a real couple, not like two people just casually exploring. What made it worse was how different Jessica seemed from me. She was older, maybe 28 or 29, with this confident energy that came through even in photos. She posted about books she was reading, volunteer work she was doing, trips she'd taken alone. She seemed like she had her life together, in a way that made me feel juvenile and scattered. The photos of them together showed Harrison looking relaxed and genuinely happy. Not the polite happiness he'd been showing me lately, but real joy. They were holding hands, he had his arm around her, they were looking at each other like they shared inside jokes. It was everything I'd been trying to create with the guys I was dating, but they'd found it effortlessly. I confronted Harrison that night, demanding to know why he hadn't told me he was seeing someone seriously. He reminded me that I'd never asked for details about his dating life, and that he was respecting boundaries the same way he expected me to. But this wasn't just dating. This looked like a relationship. When I suggested we should close our arrangement and go back to just us, Harrison got quiet in a way that scared me. He said he needed to think about it, which wasn't the response I was expecting. I thought he'd be relieved to get back to our normal routine, but instead he seemed conflicted about giving up whatever he had with Jessica. That's when he told me the truth. He'd developed real feelings for her, and according to the boundary he'd set months earlier, that meant he was going to end our relationship. I couldn't believe he was actually choosing some woman he'd known for 3 months over 2 years of history with me. I tried everything I could think of to change his mind. I cried. I got angry. I reminded him of all the good times we'd had together. I promised I'd be different, more appreciative, less focused on what I was missing. But Harrison just seemed sad and determined, like he'd already made his decision and nothing I said would matter. He started packing his things that weekend, and watching him fold his clothes and pack his books felt surreal. This was actually happening. He was actually leaving me for someone else. Someone I'd basically handed to him by insisting we open our relationship. The worst part was how excited he seemed about his future with Jessica. Not in a mean way, but in a genuine way that showed he really believed she was better for him than I was. After 2 years of me trying to improve our relationship and make it more exciting, he'd found someone who gave him everything he needed without any of the drama I'd created. 6 months later, my life had completely fallen apart in ways I never could have predicted. Without Harrison's income, I couldn't afford our apartment and had to move into this cramped place with 2 roommates who were basically strangers. The independence I thought I wanted felt more like isolation when I was coming home to people who didn't care about my day or remember my favorite takeout order. My dating life became a series of disappointing encounters with men who saw me as either desperate or damaged. Word had gotten around our friend group about what happened, and guys seemed to think I was easy or unstable. None of them wanted anything serious, and the ones who did were usually weirdos I wasn't attracted to anyway. I started obsessively checking Harrison and Jessica's social media, torturing myself with updates about their perfect relationship. They went on weekend trips, met each other's families, posted photos from art museums and hiking trails. Jessica would tag him in posts about books they'd read together or concerts they'd attended. Everything looked effortless and genuine in a way that made our relationship seem forced and desperate by comparison. The breaking point came when I decided to reach out to Jessica directly. I thought maybe if I warned her about Harrison's true nature, she'd realize what she was getting into. I sent her this long message explaining how he'd emotionally cheated on me, how he'd strung me along while pursuing her, how he had commitment issues that would eventually surface in their relationship too. Instead of being grateful for the warning, Jessica screenshot our entire conversation and shared it with people we knew mutually. Suddenly, everyone could see exactly how unhinged I'd become. How I was stalking their relationship and making up lies to break them up. my reputation went from being the girl who'd made a mistake to being the crazy ex who couldn't move on. Work became impossible because I was constantly distracted and emotional. I'd snap at customers or coworkers without meaning to, unable to focus on anything except the disaster my life had become. Eventually, my manager had to let me go, claiming I wasn't a good fit for customer service anymore. Between losing Harrison's financial support and then losing my own income, I was completely screwed. The dating apps that used to feel exciting now felt like a wasteland, where I was increasingly desperate and transparent about my damage. Guys could sense something was wrong with me, and the few who were interested were usually looking to take advantage of someone who was clearly vulnerable and broke. I tried reaching out to friends for support but realized I'd neglected most of my friendships during my relationship with Harrison. The few people who still talked to me seemed uncomfortable with my bitterness and constant need to rehash what had gone wrong. They'd listen for a while, but eventually change the subject or make excuses to end our conversations. The final blow came when I found out through social media that Harrison had proposed to Jessica at the same restaurant where he'd first told me he loved me 2 years earlier. They looked radiantly happy in the engagement photos, surrounded by friends and family who were genuinely excited for them. Jessica's ring was beautiful, and you could tell Harrison had put thought into choosing something that reflected her personality. I realized that in 1 year, Jessica had gotten everything I'd wanted from Harrison. His full attention, his emotional investment, his commitment to a future together. She hadn't had to beg or manipulate or threaten to get these things. He'd given them freely because she was the kind of person who inspired that level of devotion. Even after everything that happened, I still don't think I was completely wrong about wanting to explore other relationships. I mean, how are you supposed to know if what you have is really special without comparison? And Harrison agreed to the arrangement, so whatever happened afterward was partially his responsibility too. Maybe I should have handled things differently, been less pushy, or more considerate of his feelings. But honestly, if he'd really loved me the way he claimed to, he wouldn't have been able to fall for someone else so easily. The fact that he moved on so quickly just proves that what we had wasn't as strong as I thought it was. Now I'm living in Phoenix, trying to start over again, but it's hard to meet quality people when you're 26 and starting from scratch. Most guys my age are either immature or have too much baggage from their own failed relationships. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just been content with what I had, but then I remember how suffocated and bored I felt, and I know I would have ended up resenting Harrison eventually anyway. The whole experience taught me that you can't force someone to want the same things you want, no matter how logical your arguments are. But it also taught me that some people aren't capable of handling complex relationship dynamics, and maybe Harrison was just too simple and traditional to appreciate what I was trying to create for us. I still think about them sometimes, wondering if Jessica will eventually get bored the way I did, or if Harrison will realize that what we had was deeper than whatever surface-level connection he has with her. But mostly, I try to focus on my own future and finding someone who can match my energy and understand my need for excitement and growth. People keep telling me I should take responsibility for what happened, but honestly, I tried to make our relationship better, and Harrison chose to throw it away for someone else. That says more about his character than it does about mine. I just wish things had worked out differently for everyone involved.